how can we say things? How can we use our voices for good? Good morning and welcome to Recipe for Success Take 2. Probably no one is on live with us now, and we had some really good engagement. I was excited for what was to come, but you know what? If at first you don't succeed, try again. So here we are. Hopefully you can catch this on the repeat. Are getting a little bit of feedback. Is that coming from you, Jose, by chance?
Shouldn't, but I can reduce my volume.
Okay, let's see. Oh, much better. Okay, cool. So for those of you that sat through those unbearable 8 minutes with me talking randomly, thank you for listening to the actual show. I'm really excited to have our guest here today, Jose Ramos. Most people in our industry, in the employee benefits industry, know Jose as DJ Jose, which is how I knew him for a long time until he actually happened to tune into one of my recent podcasts and had commented, and I was like, I guess I should find out what he actually does. And we had a really interesting conversation, and I just scratched the surface on what he does. So I'm really excited to dive into this conversation today. As I mentioned previously, Jose is the director of IDN Clinical, which is a division of monitored therapeutics. I had to really do some digging to learn as much as possible because I really have never looked into this particular area very much before. And I'm excited to learn. So let's kick it off by having you introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about what you do, how you got here, etc.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Nancy. And happy I can make it here. A little late to the party. It was a couple of technical issues, but we're back up and running. So yeah, Jose Ramos, aka DJ Jose. I am a respiratory therapist by trade. I started my career early on as a high school student in the Cleveland area, and I spent a lot of time at Cleveland Clinic, more than half my life there, actually, until February of 22. After I left the clinic, after being the director of the pulmonary function labs for the entire enterprise, and you know the Cleveland Clinic, it's a pretty large place. So went from there into clinical trial space, into the industry world, where I was a director of respiratory solutions, working with pharmaceutical and biotech companies and helping them work out how their studies should be showing and progressing for respiratory side of things, and what equipment they should use and what tests they should look at and what parameters. And then from there, I headed over to Monitor Therapeutics, who I worked with previously when I was at the clinic, not directly with them, but we utilized their products for remote patient monitoring for our lung transplant patients. So very familiar with the company. They also do clinical trials. I'm not in that space. I'm strictly in the outpatient, remote patient monitoring, remote therapeutic monitoring area. So,
Awesome.
And I'm here today with you.
Yay! I love that. Okay, so again, like I said, I had to do some research on this particular subject so that I could attempt to speak to you halfway intelligently about it. One of the first things you told me, I was so surprised about, is that pulmonology is actually the oldest medical specialty.
So let me put that into scope for you. So it is the oldest by age, not by how long it's been around for, but actually pulmonologists, 92% of them are the age of 55 or older. Is what I mean by oldest specialist.
So like I'm the oldest broker?
I would say not, but not even close. So yeah, so 92% of them are the age of 55 and older, and they're retiring at a faster rate than what they're able to get them out of school at. So it's
wow.
There's less than 5,000 in the country right now.
That was, again, when you shared that with me, I'm like, okay, doing the math on that, that's less than 100 per state. And we know that, of course, it doesn't actually divide out that way. You know, certain states probably have a large majority of these specialists and others are woefully understaffed. But the other thing that you had mentioned to me was that there's more than 40 million people in the United States currently living with lung disease.
Yeah, so everybody knows mostly asthmatics and COPD, but there's so many other diseases out there. They call them sometimes rare lung disease. So COPD and asthma are both an obstructive disorder, and on the other side of the spectrum is restrictive disorder. So one has a hard time getting the air out, another one has a hard time getting it in. And so that's interstitial lung disease is what they call that. But with all these patients, there's very little that could be done, but there's also a lot of undiagnosed and misdiagnosed going on out there.
So, just to go back to your previous comment, so we have the difference between obstructive and restrictive. So, obstructive is difficulty getting air in.
So that one's getting the air out. So their
Out.
lungs
So
are very
obstructive is
confined.
out, and restrictive is in. Okay,
Yeah.
very interesting. So. To go down that path a little bit further, what other diseases fall into this category of pulmonary? Because in my mind, again, maybe just from personal experience with family members, wouldn't emphysema and some of these other things fall into this category as well?
Yeah, emphysema is a perfect example. So COPD, emphysema kind of go hand in hand. There's slight differences, but I won't get into the nerdisms behind that one.
That's okay. We like nerdism. So what? So how would you describe? Because I've heard people say, "Oh, it's the same thing," and in my mind, it's not. But I don't have any. I don't have any nerdy facts to be able to fire back at them. So do tell.
Yeah, no. So COPD is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So it can be someone with long-standing bronchitis versus somebody who is a smoker. So it's first associated with smoking, just like emphysema, where emphysema is based off of either smoking or there's alpha-1 antitrypsin, which is an inherited disorder that destroys the lungs the same way smoking does.
Okay, very, very interesting. Um, so let's go back to what we were just chatting about first, as far as we've got only about 5,000 pulmonologists and 40 million. So again, the ratio on that's not good. I mean, that's like even if there was one pulmonologist for every person, that's 8,000 to one. And I don't think most specialists can handle that type of patient load. Um, why do you think we have? To me, that seems like a crisis of care. It seems like a crisis of not the adequate people with the adequate knowledge to be able to care for all these people that really need a little bit more care. Why do you think we're facing it, and what can be done about it?
More and more awareness. I think the pandemic, more than anything else, brought up the awareness of lung health out there. They've been saying for
Of
decades,
course.
in general, putting it on cigarette packs that people continue to buy, should be on anything that is involving vaping as well. But as the profession gets more and more light on it, I think we'll get more and more specialists there. I just don't know if it wasn't considered a sexy thing when people were going through. A lot of people don't like the sound of people hacking and coughing, which goes hand in hand, and also being a respiratory therapist. You hear a lot of that. So maybe some discomfort there. I'm not sure why we don't have many physicians going into that route, but as I said, they're aging and they're going out quickly, and hopefully we can get the new breeds up and running as soon as possible.
Yeah, I can definitely see the need for that. Um, I can also, it makes perfect sense to me that the pandemic and COVID would have definitely shined a light on this problem, given the fact that it affected the respiratory system. And for some people, it was extremely severe.
Mm.
And we discovered not only the shortage of specialists in that field, but we also discovered the shortage of equipment in that field to assist people when they were navigating, those very difficult times. So let's talk about what you do specifically, which is remote monitoring. So what does that mean and how does it help?
Yeah, so we do a holistic approach here at MTI, MTI Monitor Therapeutics. We are an end-to-end solution, but what remote patient monitoring or remote physiological monitoring, and then there's also remote therapeutic monitoring, RTM. And so we'll talk about the RPM side of things first, and that's devices that are in. Devices have been around for a long time. The most common one that everybody knows is for diabetes, right? You see people
Right,
wearing the
right.
patches, the pumps, everything going on. But what we've done is honed in specifically on the lungs or cardiopulmonary, so heart and lungs. So we have devices that people can do what they call spirometry, which is a lung function test to see how well those lungs are functioning. and it can help detect if somebody either has an obstructive disorder or the detection if they have a restrictive disorder from doing the testing. But we've also incorporated a pulse oximeter, so the little thing they put on your finger when you go see the
Right.
physicians,
Okay.
check your oxygen and your heart rate. We can do temperature checks, blood pressure, weight scales that also include bioimpedance, so we can tell if it's water weight versus the 2 cheeseburgers you ate last night. Not you
I
specifically.
don't like that. I don't want it to know if it was the cheeseburgers.
Well, this is for people who are having, severe emphysema,
No, I'm
COPD,
kidding.
or congestive heart failure. A lot of times they need to know what's going on. If they're fluid overload, it can affect their lungs. So you're putting more pressure on the chest or across the body. And, everything's supposed to be in good harmony. I always say the heart and lungs are best friends until one of them steals the girl, and then they start affecting the other one.
That's a pretty good line. Okay, so back to the devices. So spirometers, is that the thing where you blow into the tube and the little ball, you try and make the little ball stay up in the air?
Yeah, so it's a spirometer, but that's called an incentive spirometer after you're done with surgery, and that's to help
Okay.
recruit your alveoli to pop back open after surgery because your lungs have been sleeping. What this is done in the outpatient setting, and it's a forceful breath. So I'll demonstrate what they need to do. Is they're on a mouthpiece with a filter on it. A long time ago, they didn't have filters, and we wonder where germs came from, where people use the same tube over and over. But you have the patient take a fast, deep breath in as deep as they can and blow out as hard as you can. And keep pushing until we see that air subsides, and then another big breath back in. And what we're looking at is to see how well do the lungs snap close. So you initially get a burst of air that's called their FEV1, or their forced expiratory volume, in the first second. And then how long can they blow out? And that's your forced vital capacity. And those two numbers let us know, one, how open your airways are, and if you have a restrictive or an obstructive component behind it. And then there's loops that go along with it that can even tell more of a story if somebody perhaps has a mass, whether it's in their chest or outside of their chest, because you can change the morphology of the curve itself.
That's super interesting. So how do like wearable devices, any of those interact with some of the tests or the monitoring that you have, or is it completely separate? Because as I'm looking at my Apple Watch, because I'm a nerd and I like to look at that sort of thing.
Yeah. So you can, with the Apple Watches now, they have the pulse ox built in, so you're able to get that oxygen level. But we even do actigraph, which is wearable watches that can look at your activity. So there's certain tests in our world where you do a 6-minute walk test, and you think, well, it's a 6-minute walk test. Well, these are people with what they call pulmonary hypertension. And so these people have a correlation between their heart and their lungs where they're not acting right, and the pulmonary arteries being affected for this. And the gold standard test for them is this 6-minute walk test that will look and see, you and I go for a 6-minute walk test, and you're supposed to go as far as you can in 6 minutes. And some people within just a minute or less, or a little bit more in between there, their heart rates can skyrocket. And same thing with their blood pressures. So they need to track this in order to stay controlled if you need to change their therapy.
Oh, that's really interesting. I like that. So the remote devices or the remote things that you give to patients so that you can stay in touch with them, is it hard for the patient to use?
So the breathing test is the hardest one. It's all patient effort dependent. When you get tested in a hospital, you have a coach that walks you through it. But we've built the first ever avatar assisted technology where it actually coaches you through the test. But more importantly, it gives you post-test feedback as soon as you're done with each effort, because there's a certain number of start and end of test criteria you have to meet in order to meet the guidelines for it. And so we want to make sure, we do training with them when they get the device. We don't just send it to them and say, hey, just like a pulse ox, put this on your finger. We don't say, just put this in your mouth and breathe, because it takes a lot more than that. So we make sure that they meet the criteria we need in order to get good testing assessment from them. And then if they need any coaching in between, we work with them as well if we're seeing they're starting to fall off. But if we see their numbers worsen, we also monitor that. We offer a concierge service where we're tracking everybody, because we know bandwidth in hospitals is very, very low. And probably not going to change for a long time for that. So it's important that they have somebody watching over this, not just collecting and collect it, but we have all kind of alarms and flagging systems in place as well. And that goes for
That's
symmetry, the cheeseburgers, everything in between.
so you're going to get a red flag if I eat 2 cheeseburgers. I would never eaten 2 cheeseburgers in my life, but anyway, I think it's funny. Okay, so I can see the value of that because particularly people with these types of struggles and these types of diseases, it must be very scary for them if
Mhm.
they are struggling to get a breath or to, to either intake or exhale. And I would think that traditionally, probably their first move is to head to the ER when they feel like it's out of control. So if you're controlling it better, that's not only going to improve the quality of their life, but it also frees up healthcare resources that can maybe be deployed differently.
Well, you hit the nail on the head on that one, Nancy. And so, you're in the benefits industry, and trying to reduce ER readmissions is a huge key component. And it's actually really big for COPD and asthma patients. That if a patient is admitted to the hospital with the diagnosis of COPD, emphysema, or asthma, if they get released from the hospital and end up there back 30 days later, then the hospital does not get paid for that initial visit, let alone that visit. And so, on top of RPM and helping, assisting, and seeing where these patients are, the most crucial thing you can do is RTM for them, remote therapeutic monitoring. So, medication adherence is everything, because when you're in the hospital, they're giving you the medicines, they're giving you everything, following that regimen to get you better, to get you out. Now, if you go back home and you stop doing that for a number of different reasons, then we know you can end up back. So there
Right.
was a study done, and it showed that if you have greater than 80% adherence, then that exacerbation reduces by 47%. And if you just have 50% medication adherence, it reduces by 33%. So it's real. But you also have to get behind why are they not taking their medication. And so what we've done with our devices is ask them a question. This goes right to their phone. They just download the app, free to download. All the information crosses there into a backend portal that their caregivers can see. But we ask them the question, did you take your medication today? If they say yes, great, fantastic. If they say no, we take them down a tree. We're asking them, why didn't you take it? Did I just ordered, I ran out and I just reordered. I ran out and I can't afford it, which is a huge problem, especially this day and age with inflation. I don't like the way it makes me feel. I don't think I need it anymore. Well, if they're not knowing this and they don't have a follow up until 3 or 6 or a year down, and now they haven't been taking it, guess where they're going to end up? And taking those resources, as you mentioned, back in the ED. And the hospitals really want to cut this down as soon as possible.
Yeah. I can speak from personal family experience and dealing with older parents and family members. Adherence is a huge issue um, to doctor's instructions, medication. Adherence is a really big problem, and it's costing us billions of dollars a year in healthcare expenses for things that are completely avoidable by people simply doing what they're supposed to do. However, we are independent thinkers, and as human beings, we tend to think that we know better, or even if we don't think we know better, we're not going to do it because we don't want to. And that seems to really, it really seems to come about a little bit more often in elderly patients
Mhm.
because our good friend Allison, I love this. What she said this to me. She said, as our parents age, they become, no, it wasn't Allison. It was somebody else that said this to me, said, as our parents get older, they become more of who they always were in the first place. It was just masked before. I have to remember this because I'm getting dangerously close to this territory, but I think it's really true. And I've seen it where people just are not following doctor's orders because they don't want to. It's as simple as that. They don't want to, but then they want somebody to be responsible for the consequences of their actions, which means they're probably going to end up in the emergency room and unhappy with the care they got and be re-prescribed the same regimen they were supposed to be following in the first place. So if we can head this off a little bit, it seems like this is a very valuable tool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give you a little quote I like to use. Everybody's Superman until their kryptonite hits.
Yeah.
And everybody has a different kryptonite. And so if you're not watching or you think it's not going to affect me or I'm young and invincible, it's not until everybody wants to be a fighter till you get punched in the face. And until that happens, you're going to still continue to do what you do as long as there's no repercussions.
Yeah. So I do really like this idea of remote monitoring. I like the way that you have it structured with they initially get coaching on how to use it. So that I think is really helpful because, again, it tends to be older people that have more of these type of diseases. At least that's been my experience. And sometimes they're most resistant to using new technology unless somebody holds their hands and walks them through it to the point where they're like, okay, this isn't that hard. I get it. I'll do it. So I think that is a key component of any virtual care or remote type of system, is to have that initial touch on the front end where people are reassured how it works, why it works, and what it does. I think that takes a lot of the fear out of it for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, before we even give them a device and go with it, not everybody's going to do it. So it's a meaningful conversation with your caregivers to say, hey, this is what we'd like to do for you to make sure we can care for you the best that we can. And, it's a simple process. We like to start off with the RTM side of things because, and that's subjective. But subjective data is very important. We need to know how that person is perceiving because they can have absolutely fine numbers, but then be totally awful, or the vice versa. Sometimes they feel great because that's what they're used to. That's their homeostasis, but their numbers are in the tank and they don't even know it because they're so used to feeling like that.
Yeah. Okay, so we've already established the fact that we do have a shortage of pulmonologists in the United States. So it seems to me that there's a gap in care that's probably being currently addressed at the primary care level. And I use those terms loosely as far as being addressed. And I know this is going to be different in the direct primary care arena than opposed to traditional primary care, just because of the caseloads and the time allowances. But what do you see in the traditional primary care fee-for-service type of arrangement that is out there with primary care physicians? Are they using this type of technology? Are they identifying these people at risk? How are they helping fill that care gap?
So it's a yes and no answer. Is it being used? Yes. Is it being used effectively, correctly? And this is even in the direct primary care world as well, as you can get some of these devices for a very low cost. However, you get them. I've talked to several individuals like, yeah, I bought one 10 years ago. But 10 years ago means it's not up to the new standards, the new guidelines, which are very important. If we want to worry about patients and their quality of life and the quality of the test that we're doing to make sure we're getting the absolute best from them, we need to make sure we have the best equipment. So in the primary care world, we'll just say in general, they're utilizing the devices, but it's very little bit of education for them. They may have got training initially. Well, that person got trained and then they trained the person who took over their job, who then trained this person, and it gets really watered down. Nobody goes and focuses on the guidelines to see what they have to do the best. I was just told to tell them to take a deep breath in and blow. What I showed you earlier was not a deep breath in and blow. It was a big breath in and a blast out. So there's a lot of nuanced coaching that goes into it to make sure you get the best out of it. So it's all patient effort dependent, but without a good coach, it's not going. You're only as good as the tools you've been given at that point in time. So, as I mentioned earlier, we built the first ever avatar assisted technology to coach the patient through the test and that post-test feedback. And this is for that primary care office because we know if we get in there and see them ahead of time, we can really do a lot of good things to lead. So when you and I spoke a couple weeks ago, talked about these patients who have the diagnosis of emphysema or COPD or asthma,
Right.
but they got it a long time ago because they were hospitalized once and they were prescribed the medication, and then that was put on their problem list. So there was never any testing done to confirm diagnoses. And so these are patients you should go to first and foremost because it can affect their insurance premiums later on, or if somebody's willing to see them, or young adults who would like to go to the military, but because they were 6 years old and got an inhaler because they ended up to the ED once, short of breath, now labeled as asthmatics, have to go through all these hoops to jump to confirm that they don't have asthma, and go ahead and let them live the life they were planning to live versus being held up because of something that happened over a decade ago.
Yeah, I can see that. I just was watching a Netflix documentary on this the Olympic sprinters and the world class sprinters, and the who's the guy who's considered the fastest man in the world was diagnosed as a severe asthmatic when he was a child.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly that diagnosis does not still apply because you would not be able to compete at that level. And he said, I mean, again, I'm not talking to his doctor or anything else, but at least anecdotally, he is no longer an asthmatic. But has that been cleared? Has that been clear? That's just an example of people do change over time. Their bodies do change. The treatments they may have may change the way their body responds. And do you want to carry that label of asthmatic for the rest of your life if you have zero symptoms and your tests are clear?
Right, pre-existing condition and everything that goes with. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you can grow out of it. You can also grow into it. However, I can't tell you how many professional athletes I've tested over the years, and they're fine-tuned athletes. However, when you look under the hood, there's a lot of trouble. I've uncovered a lot of asthmatics, people with disorders they didn't even know they had. And a lot of times it doesn't appear until they stop their training and it pops up. So getting that detection early on, so that way when everything's said and done and they're done doing whatever they do, they're not subject to being debilitated by their disease.
So just out of curiosity, because that's how my mind works. So why is it that are athletes that are training that hard and particularly at that level are able to effectively suppress the symptoms? Is it because of the breath work they're doing with their training, that their body is basically treating itself while they're in that mode, or what is that?
Yeah, they're just building up the stamina. So think if you're training to do a marathon or even a 5K, the first time you go out for a run, you're going to be sucking wind, but you continue to go and persevere, and you're going to build yourself up and build that tolerance up and be able to pass it until you stop doing whatever activity. So you lose it faster than you gain it, of course.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure we keep that in mind, that they've been going all this time, and again, that's a subjective versus objective, and a lot of times you don't get both of those, and that's what we're trying to bring to this arena.
Okay, so I know we touched on this, but I want to circle back to this because I really want this message to get out to anybody that might be listening to this. What types of conditions can the remote monitoring devices and therapeutic devices that you guys provide, that IDN Clinical and Monitor Therapeutics provide for pulmonology related diseases? What would be some of the most common conditions that they would be useful for? I mean, we've identified asthma, COPD, and emphysema. Anything else that would fall into those categories that we should just make people aware of?
Yeah, cystic fibrosis, which affects you
Okay.
at birth. ALS, neuromuscular disorders. So their lungs and the diaphragm that help control the lungs and the way we breathe are affected. So there's forced vital capacity that we do, but we also do slow vital capacity, which is a maneuver where you do the same thing but in slow motion. And individuals with neuromuscular disorders can't generate the same force as like you and I could. So we go on that side of things. Pulmonary hypertension, sarcoidosis. So any lung condition that's affecting the way you're breathing can be assisted. But even on the cardiac side of things, those, again, heart and lungs are best friends until one of them acts up, can cause some issues there. Being able to, again, just looking at blood pressure as
Right.
well can be nice and easy. The long haulers for COVID have been looked and tested on this. The biggest population that see this are post lung transplant patients, but they're pre lung transplant patients before this as well. So in some programs, we do anytime they list a patient for transplant, they get this done because they're being seen every 2 or 3 months prior to what, well, not even prior, awaiting their transplant, because there's not a vending machine of lungs out
Right.
there that's going to pop it. Somebody has to go for you to continue on. And then there's interstitial lung disease. And so recently, the VA and the government released the PACT Act, which is for these burn pits and other toxins that our veterans have been affected for decades. And these individuals get what they call constrictive bronchiolitis, which is a restrictive disorder, and some can have some obstructive disorder as well. But the problem with these restrictive lung diseases is you can be normal today, and in 3 or 6 weeks, your numbers can drop drastically. So, Nancy, in your chest right now, I'm going to talk about your chest here, a little awkward, but just think about you have two 2-liter bottles in your chest of air that you're moving. Now, if I take half of one of those out, you're dropped down to 3 liters. Well, that can happen to somebody in a blink of an eye with a restrictive lung disorder. The lungs start to stiffen and harden and not as compliant to allow air to flow in to then flow out. So imagine walking around with somebody bear hugging you all day and you trying to breathe past it. That's what these patients are witnessing with. And there's medicines that can help slow the progression, but there's nothing like it is for COPD or asthma or the obstructive disorders that go long term. So these patients are either going to, unfortunately, perish or go on to the transplant route if they're lucky enough for that one.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, I definitely see the care gap that you guys are addressing and how beneficial that these remote monitoring devices and services are. So, anybody that is listening to this and has connections to either pulmonologists or primary care doctors, please share this information with them, because this is a great tool that will not only free up their time but also help their patients be monitored more effectively and lead healthier lives. So, okay, we get to move on to the fun part of the show, and we don't get to talk. We can stop talking about lungs for a second. Well, maybe. I don't know what your answers are going to be. So,
Well, let me just drop one more thing for you there. And I just wanted to say, in the primary care offices are going, as I mentioned, they can buy these machines and use them. Just make sure you can upgrade them. And
right.
the machines we provide, it automatically comes with any upgrades we do. Anytime the guidelines change, they can go. But again, if you're not going with MTI, I don't care. I just care that you're using the right guidelines to make sure you're giving these patients the best quality care you can.
Thank you for that clarification. That's super important. I mean, just think about if you were using, software from 10 years ago on your computer and you've never upgraded it, it's not going to be very effective. So the same thing applies to medical devices and monitoring, specifically medical devices. They do need to be able to be upgradable, and you don't want to make a decision that then prevents you because you spent so much money on a device. Now you're like, we can't really afford to buy another one, but we know this is out of date, so we're just going to use it anyway. So just a little bit of investigation and research will get you with the right company. Definitely reach out to Jose and MTI if you would like some information, even if it's not theirs. I'm sure he can answer any questions that you may have.
Absolutely.
So, okay, we're going to move on to the fun part of the show, which are my 5 burning questions. Jose did not know what he was signing up for when he agreed to be on this show. So we are going to kick it off with, what is your absolute favorite food in the world, and can you cook it?
Easy answer. And yes, I can cook it. Potatoes. Mashed potatoes. I can go into a Bubba reference here for Forrest Gump. You can saute them, broil them, steam them, bake them. You can do everything you can to potatoes, but I love them mashed more than any other way. But potatoes all day.
I'm a potato girl as well. Like, you can keep the sweets, just give me the potatoes.
Yeah. I'll
so
do that.
I do love potatoes.
Then I'll hop on my weight scale.
Yeah. I try not to eat as many potatoes as I'd like to eat. So I do pay attention, but I do love myself a good French fry. I'm not going to lie about that. Um, okay. So what character trait do you admire most in other people and why?
I combined two of them. Hope you don't cut me off for that one. But honesty and integrity. So you have to be upfront with people. And if you're in sales, it doesn't matter. People can read through the BS. You need to be honest and you need to have integrity behind it. You need to be willing to walk away from something that even may be a gravy train to you if things aren't going well. And I know this from personal experience. I had to do it myself. And hearing and reading people's stories that are in this community on LinkedIn all the time. And that's why I love the U Powered that we attend, because you get the honest and the most people with high integrity there as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I love those qualities as well. Okay, so now I get to flip the mirror on you and say, what character trait in yourself are you most proud of and why?
I got to go back with that honesty and integrity. This is that I left the job that I was making more money than I thought I would ever see, but I left it because they say they were about the patient, but they weren't about the patient to the full extent they should have been. And I couldn't be part of that and continue to have conversations as it wasn't sitting. My internal compass was spiraling out of control, and I just needed to get out of Dodge.
Yeah, when your internal compass is off, it's time to make a change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we've all been there for sure. Okay, so I always like to throw one that goes back to what you do in here. So, what if somebody is watching this and they're like, man, I need that? How do I get remote monitoring? Maybe their doctor's never heard of it. How would they get either connected with a doctor that could assist them with that, or maybe how would they bring that conversation up with their physician?
Yeah, so it has to be ordered by a provider. You just can't pick up the phone and get it. Could you order some devices? Yes, but where is it going? Just to yourself?
Sure.
Nothing to really track it or sit with it. So you can always go to Monitored RX, which is MTI's website. You can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. But having that discussion with your provider and asking them about remote monitoring. Again, diabetes remote monitoring has been out there for a long, long time. But lungs are just as important as your pancreas.
Yep.
We need all of our organs and we need them intact as best as possible. So just having that conversation, if they don't know, again, reach out. You can always search RPM or RTM and find it.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, this is a fun one, and you cannot answer DJ because we already know this about you. What is your secret talent or something about you that people would be surprised to learn?
So I walked into work one day. I was working in a restaurant as a teenager. I worked in a restaurant. They don't exist anymore that I know of. And I don't remember if I was going to be a line cook that day or a busboy. But the party clown canceled because he was sick. And they asked me if I would do it. So I did it. And I learned how to make balloon animals. So there's a little bit of my secret talent there.
Okay, so can we get balloon animals at U Powered in 2025?
Sure.
You're telling Emma, you know it's going to happen.
I can tell you
I
the
love
first
that.
time I dressed as a clown, I had a nasty beard and I had to be the scariest thing at that party, but the parents were so nice and the kids had a good time. I got to tell some innocent jokes, so it's good.
That's fun. Okay, last question. Who is the one person, famous or not, living or not, that you would most like to sit down and have a conversation with, and why?
And when I saw this question, I was amazed. It just fell right in time. So when I was younger, my grandfather got a park named after this person where we played baseball at. And I knew about him, but I never dug into the story. And recently I've been on a deep rabbit hole. And that's Roberto Clemente. So I'm from Cleveland, even though he played for the Pittsburgh Pirates. He was Puerto Rican, and he's a baseball player, but he was more than that. He was a humanitarian. And he actually died taking aid from Puerto Rico to Nicaragua back in the 70s in a plane crash. So they loaded up too much and the plane crashed shortly after takeoff.
Oh my goodness.
And I would just love to have a conversation with him and what was his plans after baseball? Because this was after 16 years of playing, and he was still playing. But yeah, that's who I would like to have a conversation with.
Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. I didn't know that either. So thank you for sharing that. Well, thank you so much for overcoming all of our obstacles, our technical difficulties, and we persevered. And I think this was very valuable information that, again, I'd like to amplify the message of, what you guys can do and how you can help. So if anybody is listening to this and wants more information, please reach out to Jose here on LinkedIn. If for some reason you're not connected to him or you can't figure out how to connect, reach out to me and I will be sure and pass that information along. So thanks again for joining me, Jose, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Nancy, and I'm glad we were able to finally get this together. So greatly appreciate
We did it.
it.
We did it. Okay, thank you.
Take care.